Good morning, everyone. Even though we have a few people trickling in still, we're going to get started because we really only have an hour this morning due to scheduling issues in this building. In fact, I had to boot out my own strategic planning group just to get this room. So when I went to schedule this meeting, I couldn't believe that there weren't any rooms available. So I looked to see who was using them, and Darren's group was there, and I called Darren and said, sorry, I'm taking your room. So we're very busy on campus right now, as you all know well. So we will try not to keep you longer than an hour. And we do have a number of things to cover here. So we will have time for questions at the end. And I also have some guests here who will answer questions as they go. And so we'll be able to get through the agenda, hopefully, in that way. I wanted to start with our legislative update, and then we'll have a State Board of Education update. We just finished a State Board meeting in Moscow last week. We are going to give you an update on where we are with planning for the FY18 budget. That budget goes to the State Board in June. That's when they approve the budgets every year. We'll give you a RISE update. I'm joined this morning by our internal auditor who has been kind enough to join us. He's got a lot going on, so I appreciate that very much, Reese, to talk about his work on the RISE audit. We'll talk a little bit about exciting events happening in the College of Technology, a capital campaign there as well, and that's moving some of their programs to the RISE complex and a renaming opportunity that we have there. And then just some personnel updates for the Office of the Provost. So starting with our legislative update, we had a very active legislative season. Some of you remember we've talked about these line item requests before. I wanted to tell you what the legislature actually ended up approving for higher education. As we've mentioned before, the State Board of Ed's proposal was an outcomes-based funding proposal, and known also as OBF, which asked for $10 million to set aside for institutions in the state of Idaho, higher ed institutions, that would receive that funding based on the number of graduates they produced. That proposal did not get the support of either the governor's office or the legislature. So while we talked about that OBF proposal quite a bit last year, we ended up not having that be approved. So it's not on this list. That meant that the legislature looked at individual requests of the institutions and funded those instead. Now, certainly we can answer questions, too, about what was funded for the other institutions. I don't have that on these slides, however, but certainly in a different, outside of this meeting, we can certainly let you know what those are. For Idaho State, we had approved general fund increases of 151. Well, that's the total, 151 million. That wasn't what we get in addition. That would be really great, actually. That would have been like the best legislative season ever. But it's a 3% increase overall for higher ed statewide. That increase covered a number of line items for ISU, including our Polytechnic initiative at $1.8 million. We talked about that at the last faculty assembly. That covers faculty lines and administrative support to bolster our 4-year and graduate programs in Idaho Falls to make sure that we are properly servicing those programs in that market. Due to the fact that we think that there could be a community college partner in that market very soon. So that's an exciting opportunity for us to hire tenure track faculty. We also asked for enrollment workload adjustment. Now the enrollment workload adjustment is the old funding formula for higher education in the state of Idaho. The state board recently eliminated this funding operation. So the state board no longer supports EWA, but because OBF, outcomes-based funding, did not make it through the legislative process, then EWA was instituted by the legislature. And EWA is basically a credit hour-based way of apportioning funds to the institutions. Now, part of the reason why the state board has wanted to replace it with OBF is because the legislature hasn't been funding it in years where we were all up in enrollment. So our good friend, Boise State, has been making the case for years now that they're way behind in EWA because they've had enrollment increases that have not been funded. So this year, the legislature actually did fund it. Boise State did receive increases for EWA. We would have received it's based on a 3-year average of credit hour production. Because our international student enrollment was down in that 3-year time period, we would have received a $993,000 reduction from our state appropriation. But the legislature chose to hold us harmless. So that's what that $993,000 is. It's not coming to us as money. It's coming to us as an offset. And then occupancy costs. This is for a build out in Meridian, the $109,000. Other items included funding for our Gale Life Science building remodel at $10 million. The institution's contributing $2 million to that project. That will significantly enhance our ability to maintain and to create state-of-the-art labs in that building, and also instructional capacity. And then employee compensation was passed statewide for all state employees at a 3% merit increase. We had some other items that were funded on a separate request. ISU also participates in the medical ed requests. Those include psychiatry residency requests for a director. That's $250,000 of new ongoing funding. That's for the medical residency, and $125,000 to hire an Eastern Idaho community site director for that program. We had some other interesting things happen that impact us. These were not requests, ISU requests, but certainly they are impactful for ISU. One of those was Senate Concurrent Resolution 105, which authorized the state to bond for $90 million to construct two buildings in Idaho Falls adjacent to the ISU campus. These are the CyberCore building and the C3 building. These will be leased by the Idaho National Lab with space allocated to ISU, U of I, and BSU for educational purposes. So these are INL projects that the state is bonding and then leasing back to the INL. So that's providing some additional capacity for our programs once these buildings are in place in Idaho Falls. So State Board of Education update. We met last week in Moscow. The April meeting is always the tuition and fee meeting. ISU's tuition increase request was 3%. That was based on the need to cover faculty and staff, faculty promotions, and then faculty and staff CEC fund shift. So when we get the 3% from the state, as we've talked about before, for employee compensation, we have to cover those raises for faculty and staff who are on non-appropriated dollars. And we don't punish our faculty and staff who are, based on their fund source. But we don't say, to Joanne Tokel, because she's grant funded, we're sorry, we're not going to give you a raise. We find a way to cover those internally. And so that fund shifts, it's generally about $3 million for a 3% increase. And so that $3 million will come out of our tuition and fee increase to cover those campus-wide. Our sister institutions asked for more than they received. They asked for 5% and 6%, respectively. The University of Idaho and Boise State, they were knocked down to 3.5%, which just indicates that the state board is very conscientious right now about cost and tuition levels statewide, and we anticipated that that would be the case. We had some other fee increases on the health sciences side, and those were to adjust for changes that we have in those programs. Those are program-based fees, and some of those increased to accommodate changes in those programs as well. For June, we have a June board meeting. As you know, the board meets every other month. It feels like we're either preparing for a board meeting or at a board meeting. But, of course, we don't always have items on the agenda. We will in May. We have our strategic plan submission. Many of you have been working diligently on that strategic plan. Those go to the board in June. We anticipate that that will be accepted. We have had a donor gift, which is very exciting, a named donor gift for the College of Tech program relocation to the RISE complex, and we need to seek board approval for that kind of named gift, and we will do that in June at the June board meeting, and then that building will bear the name, if it's approved, as a pending approval item of that donor. So that's exciting news for the campus. We're excited to announce that pending board approval. And then our Polytechnic proposal will go forward to the board since it has legislative approval now. We'll ask to rename essentially our administrative functions in Idaho Falls will fall under this Polytechnic proposal heading, we have 39 programs currently in Idaho Falls, in the Idaho Falls market, but unfortunately it's difficult for a student to complete those programs entirely. In IF, our goal is to bump up our faculty presence there using this line item funding and to reorganize our graduate and research enterprises there under a energy and environment focus with a broad liberal arts comprehensive undergraduate base. We are the 4-year graduate provider for Idaho Falls in board policy. So our mission there is to provide a comprehensive 4-year portfolio that include based on a broad liberal arts basis. Certainly College of Arts and Letters will be very important in that effort, and then graduate programs. Currently our grad programs are focused in engineering and sciences for the most part. I'm told that we're running out of historical photos. So I'm not sure what we will do about that, but you might start seeing some contemporary photos in these presentations. Brian, this is your area. I'll just leave that for you.
I just want to give you a brief summary of the budget process. Our budget committee, the IEAC, the Institutional Effectiveness and Assessment Council, represented by faculty, staff, and constituents, vice presidents across campus, worked on that process as well as other subgroups worked together. The focus areas for the committee this year, I felt, were enrollment initiatives and enrollment management issues across campus and retention. Program support, library inflation, and then making sure part of the purpose of the IEC is to make sure that the things we do with the budget stay aligned with our accreditation process as well. So there's kind of a combo process that happens along that line. And you know what? I didn't switch slides. Yeah, here we go. Thank you. Okay. All right, so you got my slide that had all that. So a couple areas as we worked through the process, we had some revenue enhancements from various areas across campus. So this would have been increases in new students into new programs. College of Business had a Master's of Taxation and Health Science, and also a Bachelor's of Healthcare Administration. That will bring us some new revenue for next year. College of Ed has a Master's of Arts in Teaching. The Division of Health Sciences had multiple programs where they're expanding. So that gave us another $700,000 of new revenue enhancements this year just from new students, not having anything to do with enrollment management, but just expansion of programs. We also adjusted for expense reductions as we knew that we'd had a decline in our international students, and we knew we were going to have a challenge with revenue that was associated with that. And we adjusted as the units came forward with about $7 million worth of proposals. There were several things, though, that the committee decided not to, even though they had put them on the table to be reduced. We ended up as a committee not doing those things. There was $300,000 in athletic scholarships, $300,000 of career path internships, counseling and testing area, and then public safety had some training that they'd put up on the table. Committee felt like all four of these initiatives were important, and we actually retained those within the group. So the overall final expense adjustments were a little bit over $6 million to help us in that area. I think you may have heard earlier we were talking, you'd heard big numbers of $12 million and lots of dollars there. We actually are financially doing a little bit better than what we projected with our revenue stream. So with these kind of adjustments, we thought we were still on target to trying to get our appropriated budget balanced. We still will not be balanced in total, but we're coming close for this next year, and we've worked with the state board on that communication, and they're fine with working with that on an appropriated budget. So the final adjustments give you some detail. On the next slide, of that $6 million of the expense side of things, a lot of that came from salary and benefits. Most of that came from vacant lines. There was some restructuring in a few areas, but the majority of that was vacant lines. There were also areas of some process improvement things and opportunities there, as well as you probably heard about the mail center adjusting their delivery schedule, and there were some salary savings there from adjusting in those areas as well. Materials and supplies, about $300,000 of different things. Most of that came from what we felt were some surpluses that were kind of budgeted every year, and we were able to adjust for that, as well as in the capital budget piece there, the $1.7 million. Most of that came from areas where we had excess budget. One example on the salaries piece, we'd set aside $500,000 for the FSLA, thank you, that we thought we were going to have to implement, and the feds didn't end up doing what they were going to do with that. And as a result, we just brought that forward and said we're going to reduce that money that we'd set aside for that to bring forward. So those are some of the things that we did on the expense side. So on the next slide, we basically are projecting around about a $2 million appropriated budget loss. If you remember last year, we were closer to 5, so we're narrowing that gap. And again, that's all due to enrollment issues. And as we continue to make changes and get in there, hopefully within the next year or two, we'll be balanced in the appropriated budget and work from there. How we're handling those losses in the budget is we're taking that money from our reserves, and that's part of the purpose of the reserves is to be able to do that. And I've got a slide. The next slide talks a little bit about reserves because I think a lot of people have questions about reserves. And let me just give you a little bit. Another term that you'll hear about reserves is called unrestricted net assets. That's the official title that sits on our financial statements. But these reserves are one-time funds used and accumulated over time. They're usually used for one-time projects like maintenance projects, changes in cash flow, other unplanned expenditures. And how do we get those reserves? Okay, when our tuition and fees and revenues that come into us exceed what we spend in a given year, that leftover money then is put into reserves. And again, it's just one-time money. We can't use it really for ongoing expenses, but it's an opportunity for us to do different things with it. The State Board of Education requires us to have a 5% operating 5% of operating expenses reserve. ISU currently is at 11.8%. Normal standards for our industry would suggest we should have 2 or 3 months worth of reserves in place. maybe up to 6 months, and so that would even be at a higher rate. We feel like we're okay. Hopefully no other big disaster happens to us, so we'll be okay. Reserves are also a tool used by the bond rating agencies to rate us. So if we go out to get financing through the bond market, that would be the way that they would look at that from as well. So of those reserves, it's broken into three components on the next slide here: obligated, designated, and unrestricted. So sometimes you hear different numbers out there. 113 million is the total of reserves, but it's broken up just into three different pieces. The obligated piece, basically about 34 million, are really, obligated funds that we have commitments to pay off bond debt, to contracts that we've signed, those type of things, obligations for the university for materials, supplies, constructions, different things like that. The designated amount is about 50,000. We're not legally contracted for, but we have, in our strategic planning and alignment again with what was in the IEC, we have dedicated or set aside proposed ideas for how we can spend those funds for the future. It's tied to just our active planning processes that we go through the university. And then the final piece, which is the 5% piece that we need to make sure that we have on hand in case of just any emergencies, is the unrestricted piece, and that's a bridge in case we do have issues. And with the enrollment thing, that's kind of where we're using that to help us make sure that we get through this enrollment challenge until we can readjust and realign our budget. So, and that's about 30 million. Excuse me. So, any questions? I think that was the end of my thing, just to kind of give you a flavor for what's there on both the obligated and designated. We keep detailed lists of those things so that we know, and we're adjusting those on the designated side for different needs that come up and different things that occur. When we have emergencies, we will take stuff out of that unrestricted piece and put it into the designated because we need to know what's going to happen there. So, any questions? Yes. I'll let Laura kind of address that. She has a better handle on that.
Actually, our international student numbers look good for fall. We will actually be up, I believe. At least that's what enrollment management is projecting. It's the sponsored students that have created the revenue challenge because sponsored students were paying more even than some other international students. So we expect our entire international student pool to continue to grow and to be more diverse. But our Saudi and Kuwaiti cohorts are down. And that's because we're at saturation point for the state of Idaho for one of those agencies, and for all of our programs at ISU for the other. We believe that in a year, we won't be at saturation point any longer. We are expecting a significant graduation class in FY18. And so in FY19, we can approach those agencies and judiciously begin admitting those sponsored students again, depending on what happens with those scholarship programs, of course. But we've changed our standard for international students as well, increased the language exam requirements, and that had some impact a couple of semesters ago, but that's evened out now as well. So we expect that international student population to be back up in the fall. Any other questions for Brian?
Brian, Ted Peterson from Physical and Occupational Therapy. I'm just curious about the vacant faculty lines that were part of the cost adjustments. There are those lines that have been agreed to maintain vacant for the year, or are those lines that are gone?
The lines that were proposed and given up are permanent things for the immediate short-term, long-term, I would say. Depending on what enrollment happens and what goes across campus with our financial position, we can add those back at any time. One misnomer I think out there is that it's hard to get PCN numbers. That's a false statement. We can always add PCN numbers. We can always add things, even if the PCN goes away. It's basically on our management side of what we want to do. So at this time, I would say yes, they're gone. But in a year or two, if things seem to turn around and we get better and we need those positions back, then I said yes, we'll be able to go back and fill those. Are you agreeing with that? Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. Oh, one more. Yeah.
I'll just come up here and ask you. So, Randy Earls, College of Arts and Letters. Could you clear up some terminology for me? If something is unrestricted net assets, how is it obligated? Doesn't that make it restricted?
That's a terminology thing on all of this. Technically, if you look at all of those three categories I showed you, those really are all unrestricted because there's no restrictions on how we can use those. But in reality, we've tried to designate or obligate those things into those two categories. And what I would really call the really unrestricted net assets are that $29 million that's out there that is kind of our cushion that we're not really trying to commit to anything. It's kind of a terminology schematics thing. I wouldn't get too hung up on it. It's we can make adjustments in all of those categories if we need to, other than the obligated piece, because we've already made some contractual agreement in those. Does that answer your question, Randy?
More or less.
Okay. It's complicated, I know.
The 113 million represents what percent of our operating budget?
The 29 million represents the 11.6%. So that unrestricted piece of those three components, that represents 11.6. Anything else? Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Brian. And just to clarify a little bit about what Brian said, Randy, about those unrestricted funds, that's more about how the board is classifying that those types of funds. So it's a classification for that type of money. Certain types of money we can't spend on the class fees are restricted by nature. So these are funds that are unrestricted by nature, but that doesn't mean they're not obligated. Does that make sense? They can be, therefore, unrestricted and obligated at the same time, which is a little confusing if we're thinking that unrestricted means that that it's not obligated. It just means that we can spend it on anything we want to because it's unrestricted. The tuition and fee revenue, tuition revenue tends to be unrestricted. Fee revenue tends to be restricted. Just to be more clear about that. Are you ready, Reese? So I'm going to turn it over to Reese Jensen now. He's our internal auditor. He's going to talk a little bit about the function of his office. Reese reports directly to the State Board of Education. So I appreciate you joining us this morning, Reese. Thank you.
Hey, Reese, just before you get started, those of you online, can you please turn your microphones off because we're getting feedback through and people can't hear.
I appreciate this opportunity to share some information with you. I've been the internal audit director here at ISU since 2005, and I think it would be helpful. Oftentimes, speak up a little bit. Okay. Internal audit's not always the most popular, or people don't typically know a lot about internal audit. So let me give you a little bit of information. Our office is comprised of myself, the director, and 2 senior auditors. Full-time staff, and then we utilize usually 1 or 2 students each year through the CPI program, and that's a great opportunity for our students to get some experience and for us to get extra help. As she mentioned, my position reports functionally to the State Board of Education Audit Committee and administratively to the president here at the university. We are responsible for conducting audits and reviews of the institution. What we do is every 2 years we do a comprehensive risk assessment. Many of you may have received our survey that we do every 2 years. That'll happen again this May, where we divide the university up into departments, processes, compliance areas, and affiliated organizations. In our audit world, we call those auditable entities. And that allows us to divvy those up, and then through the risk assessment, we take the information we receive from those surveys. We also meet with higher level management, and we do some analysis within our department to come up with a risk score for each of these auditable entities, which allows us to then, each year in June, we develop an audit plan for the upcoming fiscal year. And we use that risk assessment to identify what we think are the highest risk areas, and we put those in our plan, and our plan is approved by the State Board of Education Audit Committee each June. We usually are able to complete 6 to 8 major audits in that plan. We also have what we call reoccurring audits, which are the class fee audits, purchase cards, revenue collection. Again, many of you may have experienced those. We do those as well. And then we allocate time in our plan for investigations and management requested reviews. And those typically come through us through a hotline. I'm curious, how many here know that we have an anonymous hotline here at ISU? Obviously, we have some work to do. We've had that hotline since 2006. It's a third-party company that we contract with. It's called MySafe Campus. It's available on my website, isuedu/audit. And it's a online tool, or you can call a number, and you can then report your concerns anonymously. Those reports come instantaneously to me and to Joanne in General Counsel, and then we look at those concerns, and depending on what it is, it may end up being something that we pass on to, say, Human Resources or Affirmative Action. And oftentimes people come to us directly, and we perform an initial assessment of those concerns, and if it appears to be a serious concern, we will then schedule an investigation. Those investigations typically take precedence over other audit work that we do, but it creates a real challenge for us because the expectation is that we'll complete our annual plan, but we also need to complete these investigations, and that segues into the RISE audit. This was not a planned audit. This was something that came through as a request from management last September. And again, due to our responsibilities to complete our plan, my staff has helped me somewhat, but it's pretty much been me that's been working on that investigation or audit. And I've had to set it aside on various occasions, one of which was every 5 years we're required to do what we call a QAR, Quality Assurance Review. It's a self-review with an external validation. I think it's very similar to an accreditation, and that happened this year. We completed that in January. So it's been a challenge for me to set it aside, pick it up again. Also, there's been a lot of complexity and other challenges with it. The subject matter of the audit itself, the scientific information. I'm not a scientist. That makes it challenging. And then another big challenge is many of the knowledge holders of what occurred at the RISE over the years are no longer with the institution. So as an internal auditor, I have very limited access to those individuals. So what I've been doing is relying upon emails to try to piece together what happened. And in those emails, I have close to 200,000 emails to review. Now, I'm not reading every one of them, but it creates a challenge and very time-consuming. And then the other issue is, frankly, I've underestimated the time it would take to complete this audit. It's been a very comprehensive, large audit for me. That being said, I hope to be done by the end of May. And as far as, though, given the situation, I'm unable to discuss specific findings of the audit at this point because it's not complete. But I could entertain any other questions that you may have about the process or about the audit in general.
Will those findings in their entirety be made public, or will you just be providing a executive summary of the audit? I mean, what information will be presented when the audit is to the public, not necessarily just to the
Well, I don't, in my position, present my audit work to the public specifically. The way the process works is that I will complete reports. They go to the president. I, every year, have to do a mid-year and annual report to the State Board of Audit Committee, who I report to. In those reports, I give a summary of what I found, And then, of course, the audit committee has the ability to request those reports if they desire. So I present that to university management, and that's the process there. Any questions?
This may seem very naive, but since we are a state institution publicly funded, won't we be obligated to share the results of the RISE findings?
As far as publicly? Well, the reality is, and I always rely upon general counsel for these type of things, is that given we are a public entity, the work that I do is potentially public information. But it is challenging because oftentimes what I do deals with personnel issues, potential litigation issues, and so forth, which are protected from that public disclosure. So that's really helpful for me as internal audit director, given I'm not an attorney, that I rely upon general counsel to make those determinations. Anything else? And then lastly, if you were involved and you have information or concerns that would help me in completing this audit, I very much appreciate it. You can contact me directly, or if you have any concerns that you want to be anonymous, you can utilize that hotline that we have. Okay? All right, thank you.
Thank you, Reese. And thank you, too, for all the work you've been doing. Management has asked Reese to do a number of investigations, and we appreciate his work very much. I wanted to switch gears for a moment here and talk about an exciting project that we have going on in the College of Technology, and just give you kind of an overview of what we will be doing there. As many of you know, some of our College of Technology programs have been housed in very historical structures over time, which are kind of cool if you're a historian, but pretty awful if you're a diesel mechanic. So we need to get those programs into a much better situation for them. We have the premier College of Technology programs in the state and the region, and they need to be in a space that is befitting their status. And so that's what we will be doing, moving the high bay type programs and automotive-related programs and the civil engineering technology-related programs into what will hopefully be formally known as the RISE complex once we get our naming item through the state board in June. And here's a list of what we're proposing to move to RISE for College of Technology. We expect to start seeing some of this movement happen this summer, actually, but the design work for the entire project as a whole is in process now, and we'll go to the board once that design is completed. So the way it works for all of our projects is that we get design authority from the board for anything that's over $1 million. This project certainly will be over $1 million in total. And then we go out to bid for the designer through the Department of Public Works, and we hire that design and engineering effort, and that will be completed hopefully. Usually it takes about 90 days to complete that process, and then we'll go to the state board again once we have the design, because then we'll have a much better understanding of what the cost will be. As I mentioned before, this is a partially donor-supported effort. We have a named donor already who's committed a multi-million-dollar gift. And we have some other donors as well who have come forward with significant donations. And so we expect that this effort will have strong donation support. And we're excited for our College of Technology to be in a premier environment. It should take about 2 years, actually, to move all of those programs. Some of them require significant ventilation systems that we will be designing as we go. But if any of you are familiar with the Micron building at the College of Western Idaho, this building will look very much like that when we have completed this project. I wanted to give you just a couple of personnel updates for our office. We will have 2 dean searches going on next year. We are in the process of of making appointments for the chairs of those dean searches, faculty chairs. They'll also have some administrative support as well. And both the College of Education chairs and the Executive Committee and College of Science and Engineering have helped our office identify faculty who are willing and who have been nominated to serve as chair of those committees. So we'll be announcing that probably within the next couple of weeks. We'll be naming those committees as well in the next couple of weeks, and then they'll start their work in the fall. The goal for both of those committees is to have a permanent dean in place by the beginning of the contract for starting in 18. So we want someone in place by July of 18, and in some case it could be sooner, depending on how that committee work progresses. I also wanted to note that Margaret Johnson, who has been serving as our Faculty Affairs Coordinator, will continue to do that work next year. So for Faculty Affairs matters, some of you have worked closely with Margaret, but certainly she'll continue in that role. She attends Faculty Senate, and she represents Faculty Affairs broadly on campus. We have been very fortunate to have Dottie Salmons, and she's with us this morning, serve as our faculty fellow in the provost's office this past year. Dottie's been working on a number of projects that she will update you all on in probably our first faculty assembly when we come back. Dottie will be on sabbatical, so this is something that we really appreciate her doing. And she'll be wrapping up those projects in the next month or so and be reporting out on those for Faculty Senate and also for this group. Our plan is to have a faculty fellow in place probably about every 2 years to work on specific projects. Dottie's been working on faculty development projects and also on, and you probably are aware of this, on student evaluations and getting a sense of what we're doing with student evaluations campus-wide, which is, it turns out to be quite disparate across the colleges. And that's it for our formal presentation. I do want to just ask all of you in the remote sites to mute your microphone again, or Darren's going to come ask after you. And certainly we can stand for any questions that you have at this time.
Thank you, Laura. Shorter people, I guess. So I'm here as a faculty member, but I'm also a faculty senator and one of the co-chairs for the faculty. Initially, I'm just here to represent myself. So I wanted to bring something up. At our college, I represent the College of Technology. And just the other day, a couple of the faculty walked up and asked if the faculty senate had submitted some questions to you, and we hadn't. So they printed up a copy of a letter that was not sent to me. Apparently, I've asked to not be on this email group send out that somebody is doing. And here's the concern. It's addressed to you, but the first sentence was very upsetting. The faculty at ISU respectively request that you address the questions listed below on this forum today. And I stopped there. And the faculty members stopped there also, and they said, are you representing us? Because this says the faculty at ISU. So I'm here to tell you that these don't represent me. I had no say-so in these as a faculty member. I'm very disappointed that a faculty member stepped up and decided to say they represent me, and they don't. There's only one body here at the university that's duly elected, and that's the Faculty Senate, that in some ways does represent the faculty. So I took a walk around this morning and got with many of my colleagues at the College of Technology, and the majority of them said the same thing. They stopped after the first sentence and were pretty upset that somebody thought they could represent them. And a couple of them read the questions, and their comments about the questions were they were offensive, they were inappropriate, and they're kind of questions that are constructed that you're darned if you do answer them and you're darned if you don't. So as a faculty member, I'm concerned that somebody thinks they have the right to say they represent me and they don't. So that's kind of what I wanted to say. If you choose to answer those are fine. I probably wouldn't. So thank you.
Thank you, David. I appreciate that. And I do want to say a couple of things about the way we handle these assemblies. Certainly, faculty do send us questions in advance, and I try to weave the answers to those questions into the presentations. We've had questions about reserves. We've certainly had questions about budget processes. We've had questions about where is that RISE audit. So thank you, Reese, for your willingness to be here today, because I didn't want to speak for the internal auditor. So I certainly try to, if you send me questions in advance, we will do our best to answer those. I know sometimes we can't answer questions that are personnel in nature. Legal restrictions mean that we can't answer every question. Joanne's here this morning to help us if we get questions like that. Certainly, we have offices on campus, though, that can provide support if you have questions of that nature, and certainly we can send you in that direction. I want to also say a couple of things about Faculty Senate and its role on campus. One of the things that our accreditors have evaluated extensively is our governance structure here, and that has to do with a history of governance challenges in the past. As a result, we have been evaluated by our accreditor. We've been evaluated by the state board, and recently even affirmed that our Faculty Senate is a high-functioning entity. It's duly elected. In the cases where colleges are choosing not to send representatives, that's entirely that college's decision. An accrediting body recently issued a statement to us that said, you have more representation than almost any campus because we have all these elected bodies, Curriculum Council, General Education Requirements Committee. I know that some of you feel that is a lot in your colleges. Certainly Candy's always looking for people to fill those positions. So we do have a lot of elected representation, and I would encourage you to make sure that you work through Faculty Senate if it's a Faculty Senate related matter. I would encourage you to work through Curriculum Council if it's a curriculum matter. The Provost's office does technically approve Curriculum Council's work because it goes into the catalog, and we are the approver of all curriculum on campus. But the chances of it being overturned at our level tend to be pretty rare. We've had that question too. Why does the Provost's office approve the minutes of Curriculum Council? And that's because it's catalog copy is how Curriculum Council is producing that information in their minutes. Certainly would stand for any other questions.
My name is Gene Warren. I am a faculty senator from the College of Technology. I'm also the co-chair-elect for the next academic year. I just want to thank you for doing these forums, for informing the faculty of the budget situations and anything else that's really occurring on campus. It's good to hear, and this is unprecedented to have this type of information come to us. You've done a few of these now, and it's been very enlightening. It's too bad we don't have more faculty members showing up to these, but hopefully they're online and listen to those. I also want to thank you for having representation on the Faculty Senate. We have been very functional in the Faculty Senate. We have gone through many policies and procedures. We have vetted those. We have created some of those. We've changed them. And there's many of those documents that have come through the Faculty Senate. And so very viable, and we're working hard to do these things. We've done a lot of changes to increase the faculty voice on many things that we do. So, and also you attending to some of these meetings to give us some of those updates has also been encouraging. So I want to thank you and your staff for that. We are not puppets of the administration by any means. We have representation for all of our colleges, and some of those colleges who decide not to have representation on the Faculty Senate, I believe that they're missing out. We're doing a great job, and it's actually an exciting time to be part of the faculty in these days right now. So I appreciate that, and thank you.
Thank you, Gene, and thank you for your service as well. Our Faculty Senate co-chairs serve for sometimes 2 years, 3 years at a time, and that's a very time-consuming effort. So thank you for doing that.
My name's Mike Ellis, and I was the one that sent out the email referred to earlier. And I do not represent all faculty, and so I apologize if that impression was given. However, I was not aware that you had to be a representative of all faculty to ask a question. Is that true?
Certainly that's not true, Mike, and I think that they were just referring to the email itself. And we had other faculty members send us questions in advance as well.
So I guess I don't really understand the point of that, but that's my point. Is I want to make it clear I do not represent all faculty, but what I did send you do represent a number of faculty on campus.
I appreciate the efforts of all of you to send us questions in advance. Like I said, we do our best to answer those in these venues. We will continue to have these assemblies. We'll have at least 2 a semester. There may be occasions where we have one with short notice. I mean, certainly I hope that doesn't happen, because that'll probably mean that we have to address something in short order. We've been fortunate. We are on a very happy trajectory here. We did well in the legislative session. Our enrollment indicators are all up. That doesn't mean that our enrollment will necessarily be up in the fall. And Scott's in the back there, scared of what I'm going to say now. But it means that all of our indicators are up. We certainly don't want them all to be down right now. So we're pretty excited about that. That's due to all of your hard work. I have to compliment the faculty. You all have sold your programs. You've all gone out there to speak to students. I do not believe that we have more dedicated faculty anywhere than here. And one of the ways that we know that's the case is that our faculty and student teams are performing amazingly well at international, national, and regional conferences. They've all won awards. Every team we've sent out in the last 6 months has either come in first, second, or third place, essentially. So, and the competition are places like Stanford and University of Oregon. So we feel really good about our quality, about our programs. We've had to make some budget adjustments, of course, this year. I asked our non-academic units to carry a heavy lift on that side of the house because we felt like we really needed to bring down the overhead. I really appreciate their efforts. Even our internal auditor gave up funding. Appreciate his efforts and legal counsel. It was difficult for our non-academic units to reach those targets, and so we've worked hard to try to bring down that overhead so that we can grow our programs and continue to provide excellent service to our students, and I appreciate all of your efforts in doing that. I certainly hope that you'll take time this summer to reflect on the successes that we've all had this past year, that you'll take time to rejuvenate and support each other and to rest. This is the craziest time in the academic calendar, of course, so it's important to just stay sane and to attend commencement and then to enjoy the summer. So I'm happy to entertain any other questions or comments, but I don't want to keep you beyond our time frame either. We'll try to shake up the timing of these meetings. This one's dicey at 10 a.m., but I appreciate you joining us. Thank you.